Thanks, Karen. It's certainly been an exciting journey so far. And when dealing with you in this group, we know it's about producing an actual outcome, not just an activity. And it's great to hear that we have so much momentum. And I know we'll hear a little bit more about that. For those that I don't know, you have Karen's bio starting from when I was 6. And it was certainly an honor to cut my teeth and learn a lot of very important lessons with her, and then with Paul O'Neill at the Pittsburgh Regional Healthcare Initiative, and to found Value Capture with Paul. You know, we are a small mission-focused trusted advisory firm, and we work with leaders that are committed to eliminating harm. And we're proud to have advised many who have set the pace, and they include fancy names and those that aren't. We know the state of play where the work is, and we sit at the intersection of safety science and Toyota Production System, or lean principles, which may be why Karen asked me to address this topic today. I also want to acknowledge Chairman Sumwalt, Gary Kaplan of Virginia Mason, who's not on the call, David Klassen, who is, Wendy Everett, Mike McShay, in conversations and presentations with several others of you. This includes you, Leah Binder, Steve Shortell, David Mayer, others. To zero in just for a second on 2, as what Karen's already explained from Chairman Sumwalt, we've learned really what are the key essences that have to be in place if we're going to use this to catalyze the movement forward. And it's an incredible contribution. You may hear me refer to it in the context of TPS lean principles once or twice in the next few slides. And I also want to acknowledge Gary Kaplan for an earlier talk, very sensitively representing how the actual Toyota Production System principles deeply support a human-focused and systemic approach to safety, including artificial intelligence. If I make any contribution, it will be to try to draw their wisdoms forward and set up for another true world-leading expert in what tech can enable in healthcare when done right, and that's John Zimmerman. For those that don't know, John is at such a level that he gives a world-famous lecture every year on the topic, and is occasionally stopped in airports in other countries abroad by aspiring postdocs who have literally flown to that country, tracking his travel to try to talk to him and talk to him about coming to his lab. So you have a treat after me, so consider me the warm-up band here. And let's see. I've lost my slide advancer. There we go. All right, so I want to start with where I thought we were 18 months ago. And Karen and Wendy and I were at the Princeton conference in the summer of 2019, and we had a chance to comment on how far we thought we'd come in the safety movement since the IOM. And so summer of 2019, so this is BCE time, right, before COVID. And I made an assessment that started with the following, that in terms of building safe, established safe practices into clinical care processes, I gave us a C. And then I assessed that on leading with improvement in management systems built to learn from every incident, prevent recurrence, and proactively manage risk, and those of you that know TPS and lean, here's something coming forward here, I gave us a D-. I was actually just being polite. And that's despite Karen taught me never to just be polite and to use my time and material wisely. And so the real topic today is, without being polite, how would an NPSA support frontline lean safety improvement efforts? And so that's what I hope to do. And the roll-up answer is it would help a lot. And an NPSA properly created is necessary. And the reason is that lean works. Steve Shortell and his colleagues at CLEAR have done wonderful research to show that even at the modest levels practiced today, measurable improvements in safety and quality result. And as Paul Sr. said, the ideas of the Toyota Production System and safety science have been proven since World War II in complex system after complex system. We in healthcare are not immune to the laws of safety science and systemness. Indeed, our failures to progress faster, we underline that truth too well. But as Karen said in a related advocacy meeting this Monday, the frontline can't do it on their own. And so just as frontline improvers in a single health system can't reach and sustain excellence without strong leader-led systemic approach in their own institution, we can't sustain excellence nationally without a beacon such as the NPSA. And I'll just pause and say, you know, one of the things that is heartbreaking is if you're a frontline lean improver and you see what is possible at the pinnacle, as Karen has started to describe it, And then you see that the conditions aren't in place in your organization to get there. We need the NPSA to help everybody have the conditions to get there. So I think it can do it in three ways, and I'll just make a few points to support these three pieces. And I, could go on, but I'll limit it to this three. I think by standing for nothing except truth and transparency when it comes to what happened, what should be done everywhere to prevent recurrence is fundamental. I think promoting rigor in how we design, operate, and improve within institutions and as a national safety system is a wide open field for a catalyzing force to gather in the great work that's already being done. And of course, as Karen has highlighted and pointing to the future, bringing technology, AI to bear in the most powerful, proactive, frontline human and patient supporting ways, making it done right, the expected standard. So I'm going to tell a few stories, show a few pictures, and I guess what I'll say is I'm going to build up to the exciting stuff, and I will get more hopeful as I go along. So before I try to illustrate each of these three ways, I want to start with a reminder of how the current safety system is not serving improvers or patients. So before I do anything like this talk, I like to touch base with some of those I know who are more knowledgeable than I am about the subject, and they have the additional advantage of actually doing the work, actually clinicians trying to make things better. And in this case, among those I talked to before this talk was the head of a hospitalist group at a fairly sizable system, and he's the past chief medical officer and chief quality officer, and he's a champion of lean improvement. And I asked him a simple question, whether their system is part of a patient safety organization or another safety improvement collaborative. And here's his quote: "I am not at the table anymore, so I can't say with certainty. I know we shared data with a certain group in the past in a safety collaborative, and I know we are now partnering with another to do performance improvement. But as far as I can tell, that is just another administrative claims database with a flashy name. It will only be helpful if data is shared at the front line over an extended time with a focus on improvement, not blame," as Karen's highlighted. None of that type of culture is filtered down to the worker bees yet. So I want to repeat that. None of this type of culture is filtered down to the worker bees yet. And again, this is the head of the hospitalist group, a pretty critical position in the flow of any inpatient organization and a fairly sizable health system, and a vocal champion of safety and lean improvement internally. So supporting Karen's point that we're not deep enough, we're not connected enough yet, despite all the good work that's going on. And there are real consequences for this. And there are consequences for frontline improvers, frontline staff, et cetera. So this is hot off the press. This is the DART rate, days away, restricted, transferred from injuries or illness at a fairly large health system. And this, you can see COVID hitting, and the scale of harm is really remarkable, and it didn't have to happen. And this is what we're going to be seeing in many places. But I wanted in my own mind to go back before COVID to think about concrete evidence for how well we were supporting the front line when it comes to the fundamental principles of TPS and lean, and what it suggests about specifically how an NPSA can help. So into my first bucket here, the NPSA acting as a rock for truth, transparency, and accountability to prevent recurrence. The idea is that we need this anchor to make sure that what goes wrong is brought to light, analyzed in the most elite fashion, in keeping with the best of safety and system science, and what should be done to correct is crystal clear, and the imperative of leaders to act on it across the country is just as clear, and that it's public. And to begin to tie it to lean principles, people think of lean as a system of improvement tools, but if you start there, you miss the bedrock. Many of us know this, and you will fail. Lean, or TPS, starts as a leadership philosophy rooted in principle, and perhaps one of the most foundational is respect for every individual, with safety as one of the best and concrete ways to demonstrate that. So how are we doing with respect to every individual? And to test in my own mind, I found myself thinking back to 16 years ago, where a hospital president at our first client would start alignment sessions with his team with a picture of an OR burn victim, a patient that was burned in their OR from their place. It was a terrible picture of life-altering injuries, and it wasn't too different from this currently and publicly available picture of a recent OR burn victim, a young woman, for a routine procedure, who had little babies and was harmed for life. He talked about the patient, and he talked about the terrible impact on the team in the OR. He would then call on everyone in the room to join him to have grim determination that it never happened again. And with leadership and through frontline teams, they shared transparently, designed fire-safe setups, standard work, reliable training. You're hearing the elements of lean here, and prevented recurrence, which I just confirmed recently, 15 years with no recurrence in the system, similar to another partner system. But as I thought about this talk, I wondered how we were doing nationally. And I found, thanks to our friends at ECRI and then at the FDA, that around this time in 2004, there were an estimated 650 OR fires a year. And every one is entirely preventable, right? There, as the FDA emphasizes, every one. There are 3 known ingredients that have to come together to create an OR fire. And if you keep even one separate, there's no fire, but they continue to recur. Just check your headlines. But this is actually something of a bright spot, because thanks to ECRI, plus the FDA, plus our friends in anesthesia and others, and of course the support of the Leapfrog Group and others over time, they have fallen to approximately an estimated 90 to 100 fires per year. So thank you to all those champions represented here and other places that have made that progress. But it's taken 17 years to get to this point. The progress is estimated, not certain. I had to dig to find some of this information. And the prevention steps here are the most basic kind of blocking and tackling in terms of lean. And then there are all the corollaries: oxygen fires in outpatient settings, oxygen fires in home settings, et cetera. And then I won't get into that now, even though it's shocking and another field to get to. The bottom line for me in this overall success story is how much faster could we have gone with an NPSA in place? Sending go teams, getting facts out on the table, getting the story out, rigorous analysis on the table, public, not newspaper reports 17 years in, but systemic transparency and analysis and recommendations from the get-go. Basic lean techniques and innovation to make fire impossible, the recommendations, and absolutely the standard. And you can imagine the AI interventions for how we apply oxygen and other things that could actually make it foolproof, standard proof, unable to happen. And what about all the other areas of real harm where an effective coalition hasn't formed? Look at the literature and ECRI's top 10 lists, which evolve every year, and we are still several slides away from even talking about all-cause harm. David Klassen, we'll get to you. But so if that's true, how do you think we're doing on supporting more advanced lean improvement at the front line? We're not doing great. In part and parcel of our lack of commitment is the safety events remain relatively weak as a field. The number one answer when we start to work with a new partner, when we look at their records of all their harms, is still retrain. That's the number one answer. And we know that this answer inherently embeds some blame of the front line in it. So how will an NPSA properly enacted help us? And in this regard, I was really most struck by Chairman Sumwalt's clarity on his critical points, including when asked how he maintained good relationships with the industry, he replied that he didn't worry about that as such. What he worried about was their brief, which is the truth, to getting the truth out with methods that are deeply respected, state of the art, and generating the specific recommendations and vision to make things better for everyone. Keeping the focus on truth and making things better for everyone. Down on the vital importance of the NPSB's independence and the power to do their job, including subpoenas, as Karen has emphasized. And in his quote, and then some follow-up to the group, you may remember, he made this point, that on his door is this quote: "The ID of human effort should be the starting point of the investigation, not the ending point." And so, in other words, an NPSA can support frontline lean improvers by not letting health systems and the rest of us get away with the equivalent of blaming the pilot as a default. In other words, let's get more serious about safety culture and safety science. And with an NPSA, over time, frontline lean improvers like my chief hospitalist might start to believe that the important people at the heart of things in our national healthcare system actually have their back. So now let's start to move up Maslow's hierarchy a little closer to automation, but not there yet. And how NTSB can be a force for higher standards and rigor in how we design, operate, and improve. If they can help us deepen our conviction and speed our progress on the basics, how can it actually operate and to support this higher level? And to begin why, again, to understand why, we need to again look at where we are today on this level. And Steve and his colleagues' research is clear, has shown again that lean in healthcare, where it is being practiced, even with moderate fidelity, has measurable impacts. However, lean could be applied much more completely. And I want to show you a quote from a recent healthcare conference from the head of the Toyota Supplier Support Center, a really elite outfit that has been drawn into some healthcare safety work in different quarters. And he said, I want to start by saying that the great majority of what people in healthcare are calling the Toyota production system is not the Toyota production system. And what he's saying is that what we are doing is often closer to the way we've done things in the past. And the great majority of places that say they're doing lean or TPS or organizational excellence, you don't see an integrated philosophical, managerial system, technical approach to designing and improving the work that becomes the way we do things, that is truly systemic. And to make another point that shows this, many of you on the call are familiar with the Shingo Institute, the folks that have deeply studied the academic side of the principles of organizational excellence, sort of the generic but powerful TPS. And for healthcare organizations that have challenged for the prize or asked them to come in and start to think about applying the framework in a deeper way, they have been surprised that the middle bucket here of their principles around continuous improvement, the core work of applying sort of the magic of TPS principles to get higher quality, more safety, and with less waste involved, there hasn't been that much work in healthcare despite all our projects. So to make this real for all of us, let's cite some dramatic recent examples that relate to a lean principle of a sure flow and pull. And sadly, these experiences connect to all of our current experience, and Karen has foreshadowed with the discussion about the COVID experience. So let's apply it to the experience we've had with PPE. So if you can imagine an NPSA leading the investigation, as Karen has suggested, of what has led so far to the deaths of more than 3,500 healthcare workers in the line of duty and counting, zeroing in on lack of PPE. Let's compare the true lean principle of just in time to how we handle delivery of life-preserving supplies like PPE. And in the years prior to COVID-19, we had seen the spread of daily delivery of supplies to the hospital, so getting into smaller batches, which is great. But it turns out that stopped at or near the hospital door. It turned out from there were massive gaps stretching all the way back to China in the next step, huge batches of order that took weeks or months to ship to this country. And then the unbelievably months-long cycle to not really catch up. There are still shortages today. Now, do you think we were using an informed knowledge of lean design principles built to build our system fully? The type of knowledge that's allowed Toyota to bounce back within days from several catastrophes that the world predicted would bring them to their knees for months? Or did we do what we often do? We take parts of the system that help us make money or help us improve things temporarily or are easier to implement, but in the big picture, leave ourselves wide open to failure. It's why Karen and others and we are calling for a higher standard. And an NPSA can raise the expected standard of the system design knowledge through its investigations and recommendations, specifically and over time. So now let's talk about the vaccine distribution and administration system, also against some lean principles, just because it's fun, not really. So you all know, you've gotten things like this, the confusion that's happening everywhere. We all know it. We don't have to go over it. But to get more specific, the chase is on for vaccines. You register at multiple sites, all different, most of which have you check back again and again and again. Profound waste, also terrible safety and quality impacts, mental health anxiety, equity impacts, etc. So let's compare that to what the core principle of what Toyota says how you should use to design a process. And that is to design a pathway that is highly specified, predefined, simple and direct with no loops or forking. So not signing up in 50 places, not having to check back continuously, right? It's right there. It's one of the most basic things. If we knew that, we never would have designed it this way, right? And if we had experts at a NPSB-like organization holding us to a higher standard, that would become known, that would become the expected standard, et cetera, from the investigation of this crisis, but also passing and going forward. And if you compare what's happening out there to the platforms that our partners at Duke have set up, or John Toussaint recently talked about Salem Health and cited their principles that they've applied and noted that if we were all doing the right thing, we could have been done with the 65s and over in a single month, and the country could be moving forward with more alacrity. So we need the NPSB to push us. Last bucket, a champion to bring technology and AI to bear in the most powerful, proactive, frontline human and patient supporting ways. And this is the future that's coming, that's within our grasp, but has to be done well. And the NPSA can be a key champion for that. Gary Kaplan months ago reminded us that one of the key powers of Toyota in lean principles is that while they are among the last to automate, which strikes people as odd because they perfect the process and the resiliency around the process, including the human monitors of it. But when they do, they get so much more out of it because they have nailed the human factors, the interfaces, the strong and resilient process. So today, and as Karen's reminded me, when you look at a Toyota plant, you see an awful lot of automation, and they're getting a ton out of it, more than others, because they've done it the right way. So the NPSA can help us by, in lots of ways this way, helping us make sure command centers spread and are used to their full potential, expanding beyond flow to providing safety and quality process outcome monitoring and support across the health system, not just the ICUs. And this means promoting the type of work that command centers and really just should be fundamentally embedded in how health systems are run everywhere. Core systems embedded. You know, the Eisenberg winner last year was HCA, one of them, for their Spot automated sepsis detection system. It automatically detects sepsis hours earlier than conventional techniques, runs continuously, and was producing 27% year-over-year reductions in sepsis harm. That should be everywhere, right? Another example, at one of the nation's largest healthcare systems that Karen, Wendy, and I got a private tour of earlier in the year, is real-time process outcome monitoring for every COVID patient in real time. Our key process steps in keeping with the best evidence being followed. Automated process outcome learning built in, faster rates of survival improvement in the nation. The NPSA can promote process outcome surveillance and improvement and intervention as needed for every patient as standards. And that finally brings us to all-cause harm platforms embedded in EMRs. This is the near coming future state of the art. Deep credit to David Klassen and his colleagues over the year, Mike, others on this call. And to quote David from a decade ago, having automated this at some health systems, it does enable you to create an almost air traffic control type monitoring system for patients. The perspective changing on what's possible in safety is remarkable. So why is an all-cause harm platform, electronic, automated, ultimately better from the perspective of a frontline lean improver? To know where the harm actually is and direct your process improvement efforts accordingly, to know you're working on the right stuff, like glycemic control. It's true that we won't be safe until we stop still harming more than 100 people a year in operating fires, but we won't be truly further along on the journey until we're preventing the harms that happen hundreds of times in a month in a single large health system. And it really bears importance to mention in a lean context that all of these lean principles fit into a complete approach. Building quality in real time, one at a time, this patient, fix it for this patient and fix it permanently, improve continuously, built into AI continuous learning. The lean principles are all there. And of course, on top of this hierarchy, we're trying to prevent harm in the first place and do it with automated system, which embed the best human factors. And we know that we can do this too, even though it's hard work. A decade ago, David and his colleagues showed you could prevent most medication harm through one of these systems without a ton of effort, could become more automated, et cetera. You will hear much more about this and how to do it right from our next speaker. Toyota and TPS people call this concept of getting the right balance between the automatic and the human automation with a human touch. And it's exciting and it's important and it's key to doing the right thing. But here's my key point. Dramatic enhancements like these, certainly including all-cause harm electronically monitored as a standard, are not going to happen without a big push. Think about what Chairman Sumwalt shared about NTSB's steady advocacy to help the industry move from reactive to proactive, from black boxes just as accident evidence to proactive scanning of those black boxes by every airline in the industry to feed safety enhancements as the standard. That's exciting. Those of us who work in healthcare know it can happen in healthcare, but it is not going to happen without a powerful champion of the greatest credibility bringing everything out into the open. Few health systems will go willingly from 2% of harm surfacing and mostly internally to 100% of it surfacing without it becoming a standard. Which brings us back to the key points of success. If we want frontline lean improvers or the frontline supported in general, and ultimately we just want success at all compared to our current state, then we need an NPSA, and we need it to have similar power and connections to the NTSB. As Karen has highlighted eloquently and in more economy than I have. So I do want to go back to my hospitalist, my physician hospitalist leader in the trenches to make a cautionary point as I wrap up. And he says, an NTSB type system is intriguing, but given the current issues with core measures reporting and the inflexibility and failure to adapt to new information, I remain skeptical, but willing to be proven wrong. So this resource, he's earned some of his skepticism about clunky tying of executive comp to outdated measures that in his view are harming certain patients. But if we look forward and hopefully back to the power of truth and transparency, both for the industry itself, but also for the larger safety movement, if we aren't moving fast enough, the NPSA can be an engine for helping us all move faster together cooperatively, as I think Karen highlighted so right. So let's do this right. With these powers, improve my cynical but idealist frontline clinical team leader that we can connect the dots. We need an NPSA to change the trajectory on safety for every frontline lean improver, every team member, and every patient. Thanks, Karen, for this opportunity to make these remarks, and I'm eager to learn from our next speaker.